Good evening, everyone. My name is Emily Benn, and I'm delighted to be the editor of tonight's ThinkIn on what is Donald Trump's path back to power. If you haven't joined us before, thank you very much. And to those who have, welcome back. I cannot imagine that this is a subject that a lot of you listening today do not have strong opinions on. So the first thing I want to say is, please get involved in the discussion over the course of the next hour. My colleague James Wilson is going to be editing the chat, and I will try and come to you and bring as many of you in as possible. We are approaching the first anniversary of the inauguration of President Joe Biden, and we've got nearly 3 years until the next election. But of course, this being America, the campaign has already started. You get at most, I think, a week between an election result and the campaign starting again. And obviously, the figure that looms large over the next election, the elephant in the room, despite him being banned from many social media platforms, is of course the former President Donald Trump. Can he become the Grover Cleveland of the 21st century? A reference for all you US political history fans there. How could he win again? What is his path to winning the Republican primaries, and what does it do to that party if he does? How does he win a general election? Is it against President Biden running for re-election? If it isn't, who might be? What happens in the midterms? What's the impact of rising inflation? Is talk of the US political climate and cultural climate being a war footing, and a country divided more than at any time in its history, perhaps 1861, is that hyperbolic or not? Just some of the issues I hope that we are going to talk about over the course of the next hour. And I am delighted to be joined by four people to answer some of those questions, to give some perspective. Firstly, Noah Millman, who's a screenwriter, political columnist, and critic amongst many other things. Hi, Noah. Greg Swenson, who's chair of Republican Overseas and founding partner of Greg McAdam. Hi, Greg. Thanks for joining us again back at Tortoise. Sarah Baxter, a journalist, US reporter, former deputy editor of the Sunday Times and editor of the Sunday Times Magazine, who is actually joining me now from Hilton Head in South Carolina. Hi, Sarah. And to Geraldo Cadava, hello, who is a history professor at Northwestern University and also on Latino and Latina voters, and author of many publications, including The Hispanic Republicans: Shaping of an American Political Identity from Nixon to Trump. Thank you very much for joining us today, Professor. As I say, please get involved, but I'm going to start by turning to our experts in turn. Noah, if I can start with you first. There are plenty of people that, if you were, like so many of us were, sitting on a sofa on January the 6th last year, looking at what happened, and now thinking to yourself, how can Donald Trump become president again if that was how his first term ended? How can he win a Republican primary, and then how can he win an electoral college? What is it he needs to do? So can I just start you off with that kind of big question?
Sure. Thank you for having me. I think the simple answer to how is it possible after January 6th is the fact that so many Republican leaders and representatives continued to support him afterwards was an indicator that he continued to have a lot of influence inside the Republican Party. And regardless of what their feelings are about him personally, politicians pay a lot of attention to their own political base. They have to. So I think it's been clear since his conviction, since he was not convicted and the overwhelming majority of Republican senators voted to acquit, that he still had a chance. Now, if you look at polls, Donald Trump is obviously the overwhelming favorite to win the nomination if he wants it. I think that's one of the things that's still an unknown, is exactly what his goals are. But if he wants the nomination, to beat him, someone would have to run against him. And that in itself would be an enormously risky thing to do in the Republican Party. In fact, beating Donald Trump for the nomination would probably put you in a weak position to win. The best situation for the Republican Party would be if Donald Trump decides not to run, and another candidate, and therefore there is a real competition between other candidates to determine who is the standard bearer of the post-Trump party, someone who can keep alive what Trump did to reinvigorate the Republican brand and bring it to victory and a complete control of the federal government, but who can also do a better job than he did of expanding beyond the base that he established. But I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't think anyone can read Donald Trump's mind. Assuming he wants it, it's entirely possible he doesn't even get opposed by any serious candidate for the Republican nomination. And then you're looking at what a general election looks like. And normally I would say that a general election is primarily a referendum on the incumbent. So the real question of what Donald Trump's chances are, the most important questions are what does the public think of the Biden administration in 2023? I'm personally quite optimistic about what the economy will look like at that point, but I don't have any better knowledge than the folks at the Federal Reserve about that. But there are so many contingencies that we don't know about. We don't know what the final end game of the pandemic is going to be, or if we're in it now. We don't know whether a major foreign policy crisis will consume the administration, Ukraine and Taiwan being the two most obvious places that could create serious problems or serious opportunities. So I think it would be foolish to predict what the result now would be of a Trump-Biden rematch. But I think it would be safe to say that if Trump wants the nomination, he is the overwhelming favorite to get it.
And if you look back at, there were 10 Republicans last year that voted to impeach President Trump for the second time. Two of whom who were already basically leaving the political scene, and Liz Cheney being kicked out of her position in power. It's a small group anyway, and so basically what you're saying is they are just going to be those people that took a stand are going to be railroaded if Trump decides he wants to go again.
Well, if you look at, I think the in terms of what a primary would look like, his strongest potential, the strongest potential candidates right now, at least the last time I looked at a poll of this, were Mike Pence, who was Trump's vice president, Ron DeSantis, who styles himself a Trump heir, an acolyte, and Trump's son, Donald Trump Jr. Other candidates who've been proposed are Nikki Haley, who served in the Trump administration. Ted Cruz thinks he's a viable candidate. He was recently on Tucker Carlson's show, abasing himself in order to demonstrate that he was not opposed to those involved in the January 6th attack on the Capitol who didn't use violence. So I think it's hard to picture a group of people who've tied their fortunes so closely to Donald Trump saying, yes, we're now going to challenge him for the nomination if he wants it. I think that's more the real indicator than the fact that a handful of Republican senators and representatives voted to, respectively convict, but before that impeach the president a second time. Ron
DeSantis, of course, staking quite a lot of political capital on having a very different approach to managing coronavirus than many other, particularly President Biden and other Democratic states. I want to ask this now, but it's something I want to come back to. Noah, given all your experience and expertise, I mean, Donald Trump not having access to the type of broad public platform that captivated people every morning for 4 years, actually, in some ways, could you argue that's actually not a bad thing? You're not making mistakes publicly because you're not having the opportunity to do it. If I were the inner Napoleon, would say, don't interrupt your enemy while they're busy making a mistake. Actually, far from him having lost his platform, is it not a bad thing for him actually to not be on Twitter and daily? I
think in general, for a general rule is that it's not a good idea to be on Twitter for anybody.
I can't argue with that.
But I think in 2016, I think Twitter was important for Donald Trump in establishing an initial connection with certain parts of the Republican base. But I think my personal view is that social media matters a lot less than people think. I think Trump's big advantage in 2016 was in free media. He was extremely good at getting coverage from cable news, from network news. And there's a good reason for that. He was genuinely newsworthy, but he was also very good at working that process. I find it difficult to imagine that if he did run, he wouldn't be an enormous story, and that wouldn't, again, recur in that way. So I'm not sure how much Twitter really matters at the end of the day.
No, yeah, and also there's a whole other question when he becomes another political candidate, whether the same approach to having him off the platform can hold. But anyway, thanks, Noah. Sarah, can I come to you? You're in South Carolina, the state that in the Democratic primaries in 2020 kind of swung it behind Joe Biden. You live in rural Pennsylvania, a classic kind of absolutely pivotal swing county, swing state. What? Give me your sense of on the other side of it, the state of the Biden administration, and 9 months before their first massive electoral test. How were they feeling?
Well, there are quite a few signs up around where I live in Pennsylvania that say, "Don't blame me, I voted Trump." Right, so that's the new yard sign, and people have really doubled down on their support for Trump. And I think that there was a window of opportunity for Republicans to disown Donald Trump. And I'm not just talking here about the obvious disgust that a lot of Republican congressmen felt on the day of January 6th, and then they had to pipe down or get punished by Trump. It actually, within the wider electorate as a whole, Trump remained very popular. But a lot of people that I spoke to thought that he should move on. It was like, oh, we love Trump, but he's given the country so much, and it's time for somebody else to step up. And I was even at the Conservative Political Action Committee conference just under a year ago. This was in February. It's called CPAC. It was in Orlando in February last year. There'll be another one soon. And I went round there asking people who were basically wearing MAGA hats and the stars and stripes on their clothes, etc., what they thought of Donald Trump. And Donald Trump was going to be the star speaker of CPAC, and it was his first emergence back into public life after January 6th, and in fact after the inauguration. It came in about mid-February last year. And I met so many people who again said, oh, they love Donald Trump, and of course if he chose to win they would back him. But they really liked Ron DeSantis. He was obviously the Florida governor. This was in Florida. They liked Ted Cruz. They liked other people, again, that sort of echo of he's done so much, it's time for somebody else. And then I was slightly gobsmacked because the CPAC meetings always run a straw poll. And this straw poll had Donald Trump with about 65% of the vote, not 99% like some sort of, dictator from the, old Iron Curtain or something. But I think they voted for him because they wanted to express their appreciation, their love for him. But what they were telling me was they were totally ready to move on. There was one person who was not ready to move on. That's Donald Trump himself. And his speech actually there was quite boring and subdued, but he has since become more and more empowered by the fact that Republicans have been believing the sort of big lie that he won the election. I think he slightly astonished himself how far it has carried. And he's loving it. And I don't think there's any doubt that he wants to stand again. He is afraid of being a two-time loser. But as Brad Pascal, his former campaign manager, said, he wants vengeance as well. Nothing animates him more. And the truth is, he was always best at campaigning rather than governing. So he's in full campaign mode already, really. And he has managed to intimidate every potential Republican who might oppose him. And they're being bullied off the stage, and nobody's going to dare to. If he wants it, it's his.
If he wants it, it's his. Thank you. Fascinating from the CPAC angle and your experience. How do you think President Biden is doing? And then I have a separate question about the relationship between the president and the Vice President Harris, and what is that? Is that just a hospital pass of having to do voting rights in the border? I don't quite understand it, so help me.
All right. Well, first of all, President Biden is doing terribly badly. I mean, that poll that you showed at the beginning of the talk with that sort of X that he's never recovered from, of slumping, rising disapproval, slumping approval ratings, that happened to Afghanistan. It shot a hole through it, the idea that he was competent. And then the recurrence of COVID, inflation, etc., after insisting it was just a temporary blip, has really dented his credibility. And the fact is, he never had much anyway. One has to remind himself that his superpower was not being Donald Trump. And, that can work once. Can it work twice when he's going to be 82 at the time of the next inauguration? He's almost becoming irrelevant. And that's very dangerous for the Democrats. There are lots of demographic trends that don't suit him either. I think you'll probably want to talk about Hispanic voters coming up. But the Democrats lost the sort of white working class in areas like mine, and there's no sign they're coming back. And he's not persuading them to come back, and he seems to be alienating the suburban voters who backed
who were responsible for his win. Who are the is it going to be his decision really whether he's able to stand again? Are they going to, who are the likely challengers, and if he decides no, who are the likely Democratic candidates in 2024?
He wants to stand again. The progressive left have said they'll challenge him just to sort of, prepare for their own candidate, I suspect. If he's really incapable of doing it, then people say that Jill Biden will have a quiet word because nobody else is going to have the nerve to tell him it's time to go. It might have to be his wife. The truth is, though, almost any Republican could beat Joe Biden, except possibly Donald Trump. Because again, if Trump is on the ballot, that is an animating that animates an anti-Trump vote. I mean, the Republicans would be well advised to choose somebody else who could romp home and really smash the Democrats, because they seem in very poor shape at the moment. As you mentioned, the relationship with Kamala Harris seems really quite toxic. She hasn't performed well. She was handed this portfolio of voting rights, but the first thing I ever heard her speak about it was a couple of days ago in Atlanta. She really hasn't done much with that brief, and what she has done with the immigration brief is an absolute disaster area. So she hasn't impressed anybody, I'm afraid. I thought she was wonderful on the day of the inauguration. I thought, she looks marvelous, didn't know much about her. She's been quite an effective senator, I had thought. But she does seem to have a political tin ear. And recently, there's even been talk of bringing back, so the Wall Street Journal ran a very mischievous piece very recently saying, it might have to be Hillary, but Thomas Friedman at the New York Times ran a ludicrous piece, I thought, saying that really Joe Biden should run again with Liz Cheney. But I don't think I don't think Liz Cheney, she would sort of both alienate Democrats and not really win the suburbs for anybody. So that just shows what a pickle the Democrats are in.
Your exposition doesn't sound to me like one should expect particularly good fortunes for the Democrats in November this year in the midterms. Are we looking at a shellacking 2010 style, a 1994, disaster that Clinton experienced? I mean, we're going back to that.
Well, it looks like it at the moment, frankly. And Joe Biden's facing setback after setback. He's now switched on to voting rights. He doesn't seem to have much more luck passing that than he has with his Build Back Better bills in the Senate. There's still two Senate holdouts, famously Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. And, so what victories was he going to be able to tout? Everybody thought the economy would be roaring by now, and in some ways it did roar back, but COVID's put a question mark over so many things, plus the supply chain, inflation, gas prices issue. So, yeah.
Yeah, my dad always said if anything was going to make America right, it would be gas prices and your going up as much as they seem to be going. So not a great backdrop. Thanks, Sarah. Greg, can I turn to you? I see you've been writing furiously on your post-it notes while the previous speakers. So I know you're ready. Thank you very much for joining us, Chair of Republican Overseas. Do you agree with that exposition? It's former President Trump's nomination to take if he wants it. And what would it do to the party if, yes, he does?
Well, I don't think it will change the party. That change already happened in 2015 and 16. So that, I think that ship has sailed, and I would make it, very clear to the audience that whether it's Trump or anybody else, the party of the country club Republican is not coming back. The party of Bush and Mitt Romney and John McCain, it's not coming back. There's a little Reagan in this new, revived Republican Party, but it's not going to be the country club Republicans, nor was Reagan really a country club Republican. You remember he ran against George H.W. Bush, who was quite the country club guy. So, but the other number I'd point out, which I think is interesting, is that, and Sarah alluded to it, 66% of Republicans would vote for Trump, or want Trump to run again, but 85% would support someone who has Trump's policy, angles and in their portfolio and would support Trump type of policy. So, that's, and 66, by the way, is a really high number. That's amazing. And so he's got wind in his sails. If 66% of the Republicans want him to run, that's, great for him. But there's a lot of people in between, in between that 66 and 85, and I've probably put myself as one of them, that would prefer it's someone new for a number of different reasons. One of which is anybody could beat Trump right now. I could beat Trump right now. I mean, sorry, Biden right now. So
I thought you were throwing yourself in as a primary candidate there, Greg.
I mean, I can't even spell cat without the C and the A spotted to me. But I think, any decent Republican, high profile Republican would beat Biden. But as Noah pointed out, there's a lot of time between now and then. I don't think it's going to be Biden, first of all. So, there's another Barack Obama. No, nobody ever heard of Barack until 2004. There's another young, dynamic Democrat. I haven't seen him or her yet, but they're out there and they might be running in 2024. So, I wouldn't count on running against Biden because that's too easy. I mean, that's a complete joke. And I think the idea of maybe Kamala Harris or Vice President Harris being the heir apparent, there was that talk in 2000 that, Biden would run and serve one term, Kamala Harris. That's not happening either because she's polling. I mean, the only person polling lower than Kamala or lower than Biden is Kamala. The only one lower than Kamala is like Jeffrey Epstein. So there's no chance that this party is going to look in 2024 the way it looks now. So that's why I wouldn't just assume that Trump has got this easy path, because things can change. And I hope it's a Ron DeSantis. I hope it's someone who's in that 85, that has 85% supporting a not necessarily pro-Trump, but pro-Trump policy. And that's really looking good right now, and especially looking good for the midterms next year because of the disaster with the Democrats and how these issues are polling as well.
It amazes me the way that the Democratic Party managed to always fight amongst itself and have defeat from the jaws of victory in many cases politically. That element of its politics seems to be playing out in many ways today. Is it just Ron DeSantis? I mean, are we wasting our time talking about others, or who else? So who is it?
Yeah, I don't think so. Just again, because it's early. Of course, I would probably point to him as the most likely, but you still have Tom Cotton, who has managed to get himself a pretty high media profile. Friendly with the foreign policy wing of the Republican Party. You've got, I think Noah or Sarah mentioned Nikki Haley, who sort of has gone down in the, in terms of the polling. Lately, she just hasn't been getting as much attention. But Mike Pence, of course, who also was much more likely a year ago. And, his odds, if you looked at the betting numbers, Mike Pence's odds were better a year ago because he looked really good during the fiasco on January 6th. You know, he was the one who you know, did what he was supposed to do and did not listen to the president and proceeded. And granted, it was mostly a ceremonial you know, type of service, but or you know, requirement. But Pence looked really great a year ago. And remember, Pence is an incredible fundraiser. Trump does great at the rallies, but Pence is a machine in terms of fundraising. I'm not sure if I forgot someone else that's in that. Oh, Mike Pompeo, of course, who's a friend of Republicans overseas here in London. And I think Mike, you can see who's running because they're on Fox all the time. So I think Mike Pompeo has been grooming himself, you know, for the last year of the Trump, even before Trump lost. I think he, you know, had a feeling whether it was 2024 or 28 that he'd be looking at that.
I wanted to ask about Pence because he, as you say, he kind of disappeared, and yet in the last couple of weeks, a little bit more you sense at the edges, the fundraising, I assume he is beginning to think more seriously about whether this is something that he really should be.
I think he will, and maybe he'll just test it. Well, you know, will he run opposing Trump? I don't know. I mean, I doubt it. You know, he's sort of, you know, nobody knew who Mike Pence was outside of Indiana and sort of the inner political circles until Trump selected him as the president candidate. So I'm not sure he can do that. You know, I'm sure some of the other panelists might have a view, but, you know, and you know, Sarah's right. It's going to be difficult for someone to run against Trump, not because Trump doesn't like them or because it creates some sort of friction in the party. The bottom line is they're all supporters of Trump's philosophy and Trump's governing policies, which were quite successful. So, I mean, I would love it if Trump stepped aside because it lowers the risk of losing. Although, again, right now, there's very little risk of losing. But 3 years from now, there might be. So it lowers the risk of losing. And also, he could serve the new candidate can serve 2 terms. And by the way, we need someone in their 40s, for God's sake. You know, both parties. You know, the ideal candidate is Barack Obama in his 40s, Clinton in his 40s, John Kennedy in his 40s. You know, that's the sweet spot. And I would hope that we could find someone in their 40s or 50s that can carry the torch and have, you know, carry on the policies of Trump, but without, you know, the baggage that Trump has, but also, you know, come on, we need to find people that aren't in their 70s. It
has skewed rather old, I will admit. Thanks. I want to come back to you and Noah, because I want to talk and think a little bit about the team that's around Trump, aside from him and his own family. But Geraldo, thank you very much for joining us. You are, of course, an expert on Latino and Latina voters. I mean, there's always this temptation to talk about it as some homogenous bloc, which of course it is not. Donald Trump in 2020 won a larger share of the vote of Latino and Latina voters needed in 2016, although obviously a minority. What talk about how you see this in the context of a 2024 election?
Yeah, I think there's simultaneously a lot of uncertainty and expectation about what will happen with Latinos in 2022 and 2024. There was a lot of surprise that Trump had, in fact, increased his share of the Latino vote in 2020. It is just a matter of historical fact that over the past 50 years, since Richard Nixon's re-election in 1972, that the Republican candidate has won somewhere between a quarter and a third of the Latino vote. So for a long period of time, a sizable, significant minority of Latino voters have voted for the Republican candidate. So the fact that Trump won a sizable share of the Latino vote is not surprising. What was surprising to many people is that this particular Republican, who to all public appearances had spent 4 years maligning Mexican immigrants and saying unsavory things about not only Latinos but other non-white Americans and non-white people around the world, that this particular Republican president could have increased his share of the Latino vote. But I think that side of the very, visible persona of Trump publicly, is very different than the kind of organizing his administration has done to try to recruit Latino voters from day one in the White House. I mean, he was establishing, not he personally, although he appeared at some of these events, but members of his administration were reaching out to Latino business owners from 2017 onward. Same thing with evangelical churches, where Mike Pence would go visit evangelical churches in Nevada or Arizona or Florida and really build up Latino support that way. So, you know, there was a lot of just on the ground organization and commitment. I mean, you probably don't remember this, but in 2015, shortly after he declared his candidacy, Trump kind of brazenly announced that he would win the Latino vote. And, you know, he also asked African-American voters in Detroit, you know, vote for me, what do you have to lose? So there was a commitment there from 2015 onward to court Latino voters, court other non-white voters, and do better than other Republicans before him had done. You know, part of the question, and all of this kind of sets up the answer to the question that we're discussing today, is like, what is the path of Trump to election in 2024? And one possible answer to that question would be that he would sail to both a popular and electoral victory with even more you know, support from Latino and other non-white voters than he won in 2020. And that's what some of the polls that you showed, the Wall Street Journal poll that is by this point much debated, infamous, famous, however you want to see it, that showed that Latinos would be evenly split between between Biden and Trump in a 2024 rematch. I mean, that poll has come under scrutiny because it has a small sample size of Latinos, only 165 respondents out of a whole pool of 1,500 respondents. But actually 165 Latino respondents is a fairly large number of Latino respondents compared with other poll results that get reported. So, you know, I think that is just one data point among many that Democratic support from Latinos has eroded even further since 2020, and that could be a big, you know, warning sign.
What are the DNC? What are the Democrats doing about this? Because they must realize.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, since all of these polls and reports that have come out over the past year that show the increasing erosion of Latino support for Democrats has sparked a lot of panic, and it's caused Democratic strategists and consultants to scramble and commit to spending more money. My only question is, you know, in a lot of the Latino Republicans who I spend my time interviewing and talking to about this, is they say, so in November, for example, the Democratic National, is it the DCCC or the DNC? I can't remember, but committed to spending $30 million on Hispanic outreach, advertising, messaging in the 2022 midterms. And when I was going back and forth with Latino Republican organizers about what they thought about that $30 million commitment, they said, look, $30 million is a lot of money, but it doesn't mean anything if they're selling bad ideas. And they believe, Latino Republicans believe, that the energy and momentum is on their side. And it's the Republican Party that has a vision with ideas about, you know, capitalism is the best path toward prosperity, school choice, and the ability of parents to play a role in their children's education. So Republicans believe that they have policies and ideas on their side. Meanwhile, Democrats are spending a lot of time on advertising, outreach, boots on the ground, organizing, all of this stuff. And, you know, some Democratic strategists have even kind of poo-pooed the idea that we need to focus on policy and have only focused, and that we should only focus on advertising and outreach. I remember Chuck Rocha just a couple of days ago, he was the lead Hispanic organizer for the Bernie Sanders campaign in 2020. In 2020. And he was saying, like, look, we need to get ready for a fist fight and not bring our policy book to all of these fights. So that was an argument for foregrounding messaging and advertising and caring less about policy. I personally think that that's a mistake, and policy and on the ground fist fighting go hand in hand, because I do think that if Democrats take seriously the ideas of Latino voters and then ask them about how they feel about the economy and healthcare, religious liberty, school choice, all of these things, I think Democrats will find a much greater diversity of opinion and belief among Latinos than they think. And I think that recognition is an important starting point for understanding what Latino voters want.
And if you look at this electorally and where voters are, when you're thinking about 270 and the magic number, aside from the kind of obvious states that we'd have talked about before, or particular communities like the Cuban American community in Florida, which obviously went significantly more Trump this time, how is this shifting demographics in certain states, and what states are becoming more competitive, more difficult? I can't remember how many times people told me that one day Texas will become Democrat. From the kind of things you're talking about, that is not going to happen as soon as one might have thought from some of this commentary.
As soon as, or if ever. I mean, I think the idea about demography is destiny has always been a bad idea for a lot of reasons. I mean, one reason is that it takes for granted this static system of American politics, and it takes for granted that Republicans aren't going to have their answer to demographic change. And that, I've been thinking it's almost like 2 weeks before the Super Bowl, only interviewing the members of one team to understand what their strategy is for defeating their opponents, without realizing that your opponents have a strategy as well. So this idea that demographic change would usher in a period of unending Democratic victories, I think has always been a bad idea, because in a two-party system, three-party system, whatever it is, opponents are always contending for other people's votes. So I think that's really important to keep in mind. And I think that the reason that this is important in general is that there are more and more Latinos coming of age, voting, participating in elections. 2020 saw record turnout. So, at some point, both parties are going to need to take Latino voters seriously as important to their political future. You asked one quick question about geography, and I can just very quickly say this is one, I think, kind of bad way that Latino voters, not what you're suggesting, but how people have understood the Latino vote in general, that you have Cubans in Florida, they tend to be conservative. You have Mexican Americans in California, Arizona, Texas, they tend to be more liberal. I mean, those characterizations might be true in the very broadest sense, but the demography and the geography of the Latino vote is much more complicated. I mean, at this point, there are enough Latino voters in places like Wisconsin, Iowa, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, Michigan, to tilt elections everywhere they are. And so Latinos really are a national population.
Yeah, and that's already starting if you look at some of the places you just mentioned. So, as you say, the way that it is talked about as some kind of homogenous is completely wrong. Look, I promised I'd get to people, and we are already 40 minutes in. So, can I please go to Mark Collins? You raised a question. I know we have a kind of no question rule here at Tortoise, but you talked about a potential third party challenge. I want to know what you think and what your question was getting to.
Well, that was very much my question for the panelists. I'm sure you're much more qualified to answer that question than I am. I think it's inevitable that Trump will seek, in my personal opinion, the nomination. But I would like to hear people's thoughts about what I consider to be perhaps the inevitability of a third party candidate within the Republican Party, giving a voice to a lot of the disenfranchised former Republicans that one of the panelists mentioned were never coming back, but they're still here. They didn't go anywhere. And that's the tenor of my question.
Noah, you've got your hand up, and then I'll go to Sarah and Greg.
Sorry about that. I wasn't sure if we were supposed to volunteer to answer those things. I think so I'd question the premise that there are a lot of former Republicans who are currently disenfranchised. I think that's actually quite a small group. I think that in general in the United States, third parties are extremely difficult to get off the ground. And that's based not just on the fact that we have a first past the post system that turns most third-party candidates into spoilers. But the nature of the Electoral College, which makes it even more difficult running for president to win without a very geographically broad plurality, at least. So I think the odds are actually very, very low that there will be a major third party in the United States. The point where that was most likely was actually 2016, and the candidate would have been Donald Trump. And I think one reason he was so able to win in the Republican primary that year, in spite of the fact that he was such an alien life form from the perspective of the people running the party, was that they were very aware that he was capable of going out on his own and thereby splitting the party, and that he did not have such loyalty to the party that they couldn't guarantee that he would do that. At this point, since the Republican Party has become a Trumpified party, I don't see the prospect of a Republican-style third-party candidacy as anything but a spoiler, and I just don't think there'd be very much enthusiasm for a spoiler. And by the same token, I think the same thing winds up applying to the Democratic Party. The scenario that I think is intriguing, but that I don't think is going to happen, is the idea of a short-lived third party in the United States Senate. We have an equally divided Senate right now. And we have at least a handful of members who feel very ill at ease with the extremely partisan nature of the Senate as it currently exists. That's not the way the Senate was built to work. It doesn't really work very well as a partisan body, and whereas the House was designed to work that way. So people like Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema on the Democratic side, people like Lisa Murkowski and Mitt Romney on the Republican side, I can imagine a world where a handful of senators from both parties joined hands and said, we are going to break the way this institution has been working by making it impossible for either party to control the Senate and forcing it to come up with a bipartisan basis of operation. I don't think that will happen for a bunch of reasons, starting with the fact that that group of senators don't actually agree on that many things, in spite of the fact that they all are out of sync with their own parties, but also because it would put them actually in charge. And I think that's an awesome responsibility that none of those senators probably actually want. One reason they can hide behind the filibuster is that it makes it difficult to see who is actually, it allows people to take votes that are not real. And I think the odds that that group wants to take charge of the Senate is low. But that's the scenario that is actually imaginable that I could see happening if people wanted it to.
Greg, do you want to jump in at all? You were nodding. Oh, sorry, one sec. We're just unmuting you.
Great. How's that?
Perfect.
Look, I was nodding only because I totally agree with Noah. You know, the third party candidate was 2016 with Trump. Remember, he was winning only 35% of the vote in the primaries, and the non-Trump people collectively were winning 65. So if it was only one candidate, you know, maybe, but he really threw a wrench into it. And also, Republicans have a different model than the Democrats. The Democrats have superdelegates, which means that the party inner circle, you know, the kingmakers in the party are able to control it, like they did in, you know, basically getting rid of Bernie Sanders in 2020, you know, by calling Jim Clyburn and saying, we got to get rid of Sanders. And please endorse Biden. So whereas the Republicans don't really have that lever to pull. So when Trump started pulling a third of the vote and the other guys were splitting it, there wasn't really anything they could do to stop it. So the last time there was a notable third party, you know, the Green, you know, Al Gore lost to Bush, not because of dimpled Chads, he lost because of Ralph Nader. Ross Perot took votes away from HW in '92, and you know, Bill Clinton won that election with 43% of the popular vote. Before that was probably John Anderson, 1980. So yeah, it just isn't a formula that works for the structural reasons that Noah pointed out. And it's just been a disaster every time someone tries to do it. And because it ends up being a spoiler, as Noah said.
Yeah, Greg. Al Gore also lost because he couldn't win his home state, which I realize makes me sound like my dad, who says this every time his name comes up. So I've done that just just for him. Sarah, I know you've got to go, so I just wanted to come to some kind of final thoughts before you have to jump off. So I was going to finish by asking everyone who the two candidates will be in 2024. I'm not going to hold you to it. But how difficult are things going to get for the Democratic Party in the next year? Give us a sense.
They're going to get worse and worse, as I see it, the way things are going. And the trouble is with Joe Biden's age is that that's one insoluble problem. He's only going to get older. He's not going to suddenly get more and more effective in terms of communication strategy, at the very least. He can just hope that, the ship of state starts to right itself. And a lot of that is outside his control. So I think it's going to get quite bad. I do hope that somebody besides Joe Biden stands again, but he definitely wants to. He thinks he's the only person that can beat Trump. And the truth is, although it's nice to think of an Obama candidate out there, and I did cover the 2008 election, I was Washington correspondent then. Barack Obama was a phenomenon. He wasn't expected to win even then, but he had an outing. He'd appeared at the 2004 Democratic Convention.
Famously, yeah.
Famously, and people looked at him and thought, gee whiz, that guy's the future. I don't think there's anybody out there for the Democrats that one's saying, gee whiz, that guy is the future, or that gal. I would love to know, I would love someone to be found, but right now, that's a hell of a gamble. And I think Trump is banking on that. He gets more powerful every day, the more he thinks that, Biden and the Democrats are in the seat.
Are getting weaker.
Yeah, but and that is adding to his sort of, puffed up sort of bravado about it all, because, it's one thing to say you didn't lose the election, but actually he did lose the election and he knows it. And I thought it was interesting hearing Greg, basically agree with me that any other Republican would actually do better than Trump. And, it's a pity they've been so cowed. There's this wonderful group called Bellingcat, the investigative journalists, all based on this fable about who is going to bell the cat, right? The mice get together, they all agree it would be much better if somebody sticks a bell around the cat to warn them that the cat is coming so that they can, get out of the way, right? Then the mice look at each other and say, great idea, but who's going to bell the cat, right? A lot of Republicans would like to stick a bell on Donald Trump's neck, so they know he's coming and they can do something about him, but somebody has to have the nerve to take him down. And if so far it's only Chris Christie has said something and not much,
Yes, I mean, credibility of that ban, I think, possibly called into question in the past. But thanks so much, Sarah. Who is that person at the moment? Doesn't look like they exist. Thank you. I wanted to come to Taima Hervas, who I've just read your comment in the chat talking about you're working with Cuban American women supporting Democrats. Hi, Taima. Where are you and what's going on?
So I'm in Miami. I'm a part of the Key Biscayne. It's outside of Miami Dems. So we work with all of the local Democratic Party organizations, charters. So the Coral Gables, Miami, and now we're starting to approach the women voters, because if we were to get the Latin American, Cuban, Colombian, Venezuelan, Mexican, we have a very varied population here of Latin Americans that I think people tend to miss that point. If we can get them together and we can get the women's vote in particular, we have a chance of sort of changing the tide, at least in South Miami and certainly in Miami-Dade, where the margins were incredibly close. So
how is it going?
Well, I mean, it's early days. That's what's sort of sad and disappointing about this conversation, is how we've already sunk the ship before we've let it sail today.
Fair point, very fair point.
About it, and it's easy to see, Biden's having his troubles, but there's a lot of going on behind the scenes, and a lot of us who are Democrats and trying to make an impact here are a little bit more optimistic. We don't see it quite so bleak. It ain't pretty. There's no doubt about that. But I mean, if Chris Christie is our only hope right now, that's terrifying to me, and I refuse to believe that.
No, well, look, I mean, if we were talking X months ago, you'd have said Joe Biden would never would have won the primary, let alone, and then it all happened so quickly. So to your point.
I was for Bernie, and I don't think there's a kingmaker thing going on here. I think Bernie couldn't win. So it was like not having a complete loss.
And you didn't lose. So brilliant time. Well, I hope we can stay in contact, because it'd be really fascinating to keep going on to hear the progress and how you were talking about your connections to the wider democratic movement. Thank you. Before because we're running out of time, I want Luke Richardson be talking about Q, which makes me think of people who haven't listened to our podcast that Nikki Wolf did with us on finding Q. Luke, are you there?
I am here. Yep.
Hi, Luke. How are you doing? Expand on the point you were making about Q in the chat.
I just think it's a big unknown, and I've not listened to the podcast, so maybe it's covered there. But there's a lot. I think there's a lot of energy. There was such a big movement in the US. So many people involved. The stats that 40% of Americans don't believe the election happened, and I just wonder, what an adept political operative could do with that. Whether they sort of the dark arts of disinformation and the way the internet works, can that energy sort of be contained? What would the long-term sort of political campaign look like to make the most of these people coming up to the next election? That's the sort of question I'm thinking about.
Thanks, Steve. No, I could see your understanding want to come in first.
Yeah, if we want to talk about not believing the election was fair or that it was stolen, that's a little bit my bailiwick, only because I've written about it relatively recently. I think the first thing that people need to recognize is that there's a weird parallelism actually between the two parties on this. And by that, I don't mean that, Democrats also don't believe the election was fair or anything of the sort, but that my sense is that overwhelmingly the Republicans who say, I don't think the election was fair, I think the election was stolen, what they mean is I think decisions were made to change the rules as things were going along, as opposed to there are people, absolutely people, who believe there were Venezuelan voting machines and ballots shipped from China, and there is an absolutely a substantial lunatic fringe out there. But I think a much larger, and I suspect at this point a majority of Republicans believe that it was a close election. It was swung by decisions made to change the rules in the middle of the game about how ballots were distributed and so on and so forth. Every one of those decisions has very legitimate basis that Democrats can point to and that independent parties can point to as having been about the pandemic or otherwise having been about trying to make the ballot more accessible. But that doesn't matter to people who think it turned against them. In response to that, a number of Republican state legislatures have taken greater control over the elections process. And they will say, we intend to run this in a fair way, and we're not going to steal an election. But I think it's reasonable that a lot of Democrats don't trust them. And because they don't trust them, I can imagine a scenario where in 2024, you have an election and the Democrats start saying, wait, there was partisan interference with the ballot counting in Arizona, Wisconsin, Georgia, et cetera. And Republicans say, no, there wasn't. Every decision we made was entirely reasonable. I think the only way out of this is a genuinely bipartisan effort to ensure that our elections have integrity. The way in which we are increasingly treating the process of democracy itself as a political football is incredibly destructive. I'm hopeful. There's now talk of a bill that Angus King in the Senate is sponsoring, and he's got a couple of other, I know Amy Klobuchar is supporting it. I believe there are some Republicans who are supporting it as well. Tom Tillis is one of the ones who's been talked about, and he's a fairly conservative Republican, that should help to deal with this issue specifically. It won't deal with the voting rights issues that Democrats rightly are raising. Won't deal with a lot of the other questions that there still is a lot of dispute between the parties about, but will at least deal with the concern of possible election theft. And it has to be a bipartisan effort, because the ultimate goal is to get both Democrats and Republicans in power saying, this is how we have assured, so that they then can't turn around and say, oh, actually, it was stolen anyway.
Yeah. Geraldo, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just nodding my head a lot while Noah was talking, because I think that bipartisanship is crucial here. And I think that even the idea of bipartisanship, though, has come under a lot of attack recently. And, many of the people I talk to aren't even willing to hear the arguments of people who they disagree with. And I think that kind of scales up and gets reflected in how politics is conducted, where there are ideas about whether the parties are trying to actually persuade people who disagree with them, or if they're just trying to mobilize their base to ensure that all of their voters get out. But what that does, I think, is it continues to drive Americans apart from one another. And there's just a slow drift of Americans, kind of, maybe it's not even so slow, but drifting apart from one another. And I think that one thing that needs to happen at a very basic level, I think Americans broadly, and this is why bipartisanship is important, need to rearticulate their commitment to some common ideas and set of beliefs about community. I don't think it's sustainable to have both sides continuing to think that if the other side wins, it's an existential threat to the country. That has to give somehow.
And we are clear that how many people do think that. Greg, there was we're about to run out of time, but Greg, there was a quick question of someone raised in the chat. Forgive me, I've forgotten who. How is Trump and his team trying to court support overseas? Well, you are chair of Republican overseas, so tell us what is the Republican relationships like?
Yeah, look, we have we've always had a great relationship with the party. We had people visit us all the time. We've become a great place to fundraise, first of all, because we can't deliver a voting block, right? We all try to encourage the expats that are living here to vote, of course, but we all vote in 50 different states. So it doesn't really make sense for a candidate to come over to get votes, but it makes sense to fundraise, but also to just get the message out. It's a way to have a sounding board. It's an important, and we have this, we're in an important country as the best ally of the United States. So, this is a place where congressmen and senators visit often. And when President Trump and Vice President Pence came here, we, had all kinds of functions, and it's great.
Yeah.
Activity. So look, I think we'll continue to support whoever it ends up being. But right now, 66% of the Republicans want Trump.
Trump.
He's not a conspiracy. He's not putting a gun to anyone's head.
No,
people actually
exactly.
like him. That's just the way it is.
To the earlier one, we're running out of time. I'm going to wrap up very shortly. Before I do, as I promised, I would ask you. I'm not going to hold you to it. There's no money behind this prediction, and it's absolutely ludicrous to do this quite so early. But Greg, who will the two party candidates be in 2024?
With a gun to my head, I'd have to say Trump, but it's closer than we think. The Democrats, I hope to God it's either Biden or Harris. I really do.
There's a lot of there's bias in that answer that I clearly declared. Noah, we just unmute you very quickly.
Sure. I think that if Trump wants it, it's his. And I suspect that he wants it, but I'm not going to try to read his mind. So if I have to bet, I would bet it'd be his. I think that Biden, it is very rare that politicians voluntarily step aside. And I think that if he does step aside, it will be a sign that things have gotten so bad that whoever replaces him is also overwhelmingly likely to lose. I think it'll be Biden again.
Got it. Readouts. Geraldo, finally.
I have no idea, you guys. I mean, I'm gonna play along and just say, for the sake of it, that I think it'll be Trump. But just to make things on the Republican side, and just to make things interesting, let's say it's going to be AOC. Why not? I actually don't think that's going to happen, but that would be an interesting matchup.
Well, it would certainly be interesting. Well, I declare an interest, and one day I would love to see a female president of the United States. I have to say, having an American English father, it would be nice one day, but I'm not, but whoever it is. But anyway, look, guys, thank you very much. Thank you so much. I know Sarah, to Leffert, to Neva, to Geraldo, to Greg. So many unknowns. we seem to have occasionally fallen into a trap of saying it's almost inevitable that things are going to get even significantly worse for Democrats, difficult midterms. I think what has really become clear, though, in the course of the conversation, though, if Donald Trump wants to be the next Republican nominee, it is his for the taking. There are very few people that would stand against him. The question for us at Tortoise is then, how do we follow this story over the course of the next 3 years? Tamer, thank you for joining us from Miami. We want to stay in touch. Let us know how we should be covering it in your thoughts, and we will see how things progress. Things can change in politics quite a lot, but thanks very much everyone for joining us, and we'll see you very soon again at Tortoise. Please join us again and see you soon. Thank you.